"That's not your property to touch," I shouted, but the crunch of snapping metal drowned me out. The lock I had installed only 2 weeks ago clattered onto the asphalt like a wounded soldier. My Jeep sat helpless, chained no more, while Karen, the self-anointed watchdog of Maplewood Estates, stood over it with bolt cutters, chest puffed like she had just liberated the neighborhood from tyranny. A neighbor's blinds snapped shut. Another dog barked from across the cul-de-sac like it knew something illegal was unfolding. I swear the air even smelled different in that moment, sharp with gasoline and arrogance. And Karen, with her lemon-yellow visor and HOA badge lanyard swinging, looked right at me and declared, "This eyesore is against our community standards." If you've never lived under the reign of a suburban HOA president or her minions, you might think this is an exaggeration. Trust me, it's not. Maplewood Estates was less a neighborhood and more a tightly wound soap opera with freshly mulched flower beds. Every resident was required to sign a thick binder of bylaws, most of which boiled down to mow your lawn, don't paint your shutters neon green, and never, God forbid, park anything that looks unapproved in front of your house. Karen, though not the president, carried herself like a self-deputized sheriff, quoting rules with the same flair people usually reserve for Bible verses. The Jeep, however, was the thorn in her manicured side. To me, it wasn't just a Jeep, it was practically on loan from the police task force. I worked closely with them through a civilian partnership program, and my vehicle had been fitted with tracking equipment for a sting operation targeting catalytic converter thieves in our area. It was clean, legal, and registered with the city. But, to Karen, it was a rusty, military-style monstrosity lowering property values. Never mind that it was parked squarely in my own driveway. The first shot had been fired weeks earlier, in the form of a passive-aggressive letter slid under my door. "Dear Resident," it began, though I knew Karen had written it by the way the word resident was underlined 3 times. "Your vehicle fails to meet community parking standards. Kindly remove or face further action." I crumpled it, tossed it, and thought that would be the end. Then came the follow-up. A printed page from the bylaws, highlighted in neon orange with a sticky note. "Consider this your final warning." The funny thing was the bylaw in question didn't even apply. It referred to trailers, boats, and inoperable vehicles. My Jeep was none of those. That morning, I had gone inside for 10 minutes, just long enough to make coffee, before returning to the driveway to find her mid-sabotage. "What on earth are you doing?" I demanded, running down the steps 2 at a time. Karen didn't even flinch. "Enforcing the rules you've clearly decided don't apply to you," she sniffed. "This hunk of junk is a safety hazard." Behind her, Mr. Jacobs from 2 doors down raised his phone, recording. "Oh, this is going to be good," he muttered. "Karen," I said, forcing calm into my voice, "you're trespassing and destroying private property." "Private property," she scoffed, resting the bolt cutters on her hip like a weapon. "Not when it breaks HOA rules. This is community property now." That was when I realized she had no idea what she had just done. Not only had she cut through a lock I purchased myself, but she had tampered with a vehicle tied up in an active police investigation. The lock wasn't just symbolic. It was part of securing equipment that officers had discreetly placed in the Jeep. I took a deep breath. "Karen, do you even know what this Jeep is being used for?" Her visor tilted toward me like she was peering down from a throne. "Yes, it's being used to embarrass this neighborhood. And I, for one, won't allow it." I almost laughed, but the sound stuck in my throat. This wasn't just Karen being petty. This was Karen crossing a line with legal consequences I wasn't sure she could even fathom. By now, more blinds had cracked open. I spotted Mrs. Patel clutching her tea mug on her porch, Mr. Henderson pretending to water his lawn with the hose angled toward us. Every eye was on this showdown, and Karen loved the stage. "You can't just," I started, but she interrupted, holding the broken lock like a trophy. "I can, and I did," she announced, her voice rising for the crowd, "because somebody has to keep this community safe." The word safe echoed in my ears, heavy with irony. Safe from what? Higher crime? Or her personal vendetta against a Jeep that didn't fit her Pinterest board of acceptable suburban vehicles? I wanted to call her bluff, to expose right then and there what the Jeep was truly involved in. But the officers I worked with had been clear. Discretion was part of the deal. No one outside the circle needed to know about the task force, at least not yet. So instead, I closed the distance, lowered my voice, and said just loud enough for her to hear, "You just made a mistake that's way bigger than HOA drama." For the first time all morning, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. She glanced down at the bolt cutters in her hand, then at the lock in mine, as though it had suddenly dawned on her that cutting steel in broad daylight might not be the righteous act she imagined. But then she straightened, painted on her trademark smile, and called out, "If you've got a problem, take it up at the next meeting." The neighbors laughed nervously. Someone clapped. Karen basked in it like applause. I looked at the broken lock, the Jeep, the crowd, and silently promised myself that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because sooner or later Karen was going to learn that this wasn't just about a neighborhood squabble, it was about the law. And the law was coming for her. "This is a direct threat to our community values," Karen shouted, slamming a laminated page of bylaws onto the folding table. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like angry hornets. A dozen neighbors sat crammed into plastic chairs in the clubhouse, their faces glowing with equal parts boredom and anticipation. The smell of burnt coffee from the lobby drifted in, mixing with the tang of nervous sweat. And there was Karen, pacing like a prosecutor in a courtroom drama, wielding her stack of papers as if she had just uncovered the smoking gun. I hadn't said a word yet. I didn't need to. The way Karen's voice carried, the way she leaned into every syllable, this was her show. But every good performance has a twist, and I was more than ready to deliver it when the time came. If you've never attended an HOA meeting, imagine a middle school cafeteria but with more polyester slacks and passive-aggressive sighing. The boardroom of Maplewood Estates wasn't fancy, just a beige-walled room in the clubhouse with a long folding table for the board members and rows of chairs for the rest of us. The president, Linda, sat at the center with a gavel she barely used, sipping from a floral thermos like it contained the secrets of the universe. She claimed neutrality, but her smirk gave her away. Linda loved nothing more than watching her neighbors devour each other alive. Karen's opening salvo was relentless. "This vehicle," she declared, jabbing a photo of my Jeep taped onto a clipboard, "is a violation of Section 4B of our parking standards. It's oversized, unsightly, and dangerous. Children could get hurt climbing on it." "Children climb on playgrounds," I muttered, but of course she ignored me. She fanned through the pages like a magician about to reveal a trick. The problem was, I had read the actual bylaws. Section 4B said nothing about Jeeps. It referenced boats and RVs, neither of which I owned. But Karen knew most people in that room hadn't cracked open the bylaw book in years. She was banking on theatrics, not truth. Linda finally tapped her gavel, though lightly, like she was afraid of scaring the audience. "Let's allow everyone a chance to speak," she cooed, her eyes glittering with the delight of a reality TV host. Mr. Jacobs, who'd filmed Karen's bolt cutter stunt, raised his hand. "I saw what happened. She cut his lock. That's destruction of property, plain and simple." Karen snapped back. "That lock was attached to a violation. I had every right to enforce our community rules." The room erupted into whispers. Some neighbors nodded, others frowned. Mrs. Patel leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't let her bully you. That woman thinks she runs the world." I cleared my throat. With respect, Section 4B doesn't apply here. My Jeep is registered, operational, and parked in my own driveway. What Karen did wasn't enforcement, it was trespassing. Karen's face flushed the shade of a ripe tomato. She slammed her clipboard down so hard the plastic cracked. "You're twisting words. Everyone knows this Jeep is lowering property values. Do you want our homes worth less because of one person's selfishness?" That word, selfishness, hung in the air. I almost laughed. If selfishness had a mascot, it would be Karen with her laminated binder and endless crusades against garden gnomes taller than 12 inches. But before I could fire back, Linda leaned forward. "Let's not get too heated. We're here to resolve this fairly." She turned to Karen. "Though, Karen, I do have to note, cutting someone else's lock is a serious matter. The board doesn't have that kind of enforcement power." For a flicker of a second, victory tasted sweet. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting around like she had just lost control of the narrative. Then she pivoted, quick as a cat. "Fine. If the board doesn't have the power, then we need to amend the bylaws so it does. Clearly, we're vulnerable to residents who think they're above the rules." The room gasped. Amending the bylaws was no small matter. It required a vote, and the kind of debate that dragged on for months. But Karen, drunk on her own performance, was ready to scorch earth if it meant crushing me. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "You really want to put this to a vote? Because if we're going to air everything out, I'd be more than happy to share the full story of why that Jeep is here." Her smug expression faltered. She didn't know, couldn't know, what the Jeep represented. The task force, the investigation, the fact that her petty crusade had crossed into something bigger than property lines. But Linda jumped in before I could reveal anything. "All right, that's enough for tonight. We'll table this discussion until next month's meeting." Groans rippled through the crowd. People wanted blood, not delay. Team Jeep muttered their support in my direction, while Team Karen whispered indignantly about neighborhood standards. The divide was clear, lines drawn like battlefronts in a war no one had signed up for. Karen gathered her papers with a triumphant sniff, convinced she'd won the night by sheer volume. "Mark my words," she hissed at me as we filed out, "your little stunt won't last. This Jeep will be gone." I didn't respond. Not yet. But as the fluorescent lights flickered overhead and the smell of burnt coffee lingered, I knew something she didn't. The next chapter of this battle wouldn't take place in the boardroom. It would happen on her front porch, with the knock of a police officer's fist. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," the officer commanded, his voice flat but firm. Karen froze on her own front lawn, bolt cutters still dangling from her hand like the world's guiltiest accessory. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, fish-like. The cul-de-sac was silent except for the low hum of the cruiser idling at the curb. Neighbors gathered on porches and sidewalks, their faces lit up with that peculiar mix of shock and delight only fresh scandal can deliver. The smell of cut grass and gasoline hung in the air, but underneath it all was the sharper scent of Karen's panic. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore. This was the law. To understand how we got here, rewind 48 hours. The HOA meeting had barely ended when whispers spread faster than wildfire. Half the neighborhood was buzzing about Karen's bold performance, the other half gossiping about my Jeep like it was a circus elephant that had parked itself in Maplewood Estates. I stayed quiet, let the chatter swirl, and made one very deliberate phone call to the detective who'd loaned me the task force gear in the first place. I explained what had happened with the lock. He didn't laugh. He didn't shrug it off as petty suburban nonsense. He just said, "That Jeep isn't just yours right now. It's evidence. We'll handle it." 2 days later, handle it, rolled into our cul-de-sac in the form of 2 squad cars, lights flashing red against the beige siding of every HOA-approved house. Karen was on her front porch when they arrived, watering her geraniums with the smug satisfaction of someone convinced she had already won. She straightened immediately when the officers got out, pasted on her best concerned citizen smile, and said, "Oh, thank goodness you're here. I've been meaning to file a complaint," but the taller officer cut her off. "We're here about the Jeep, specifically about your actions involving it." The color drained from her face faster than a spilled glass of Chardonnay on white carpet. "My actions?" "Yes, ma'am. Tampering with secured property under police jurisdiction is a criminal offense." Gasps rippled from the peanut gallery. Neighbors who suddenly discovered urgent reasons to check their mail or sweep their driveways. Mr. Jacobs muttered, "I knew this was going to blow up." Mrs. Patel clutched her tea mug with both hands like she was watching a soap opera finale. Karen's voice pitched higher. "No, no, no. You don't understand. I was protecting the community. That Jeep was a menace. I was acting as part of our community watch." The shorter officer raised an eyebrow. "Community watch doesn't include cutting locks, ma'am," she stammered, flipping through excuses like a Rolodex. "The HOA bylaws, Section 4B. This is all documented." She gestured wildly toward Linda, who had suddenly materialized on the sidewalk, arms folded and face carefully neutral. Linda, the ever-strategist, cleared her throat. "The board does not condone individual residents taking enforcement into their own hands." Karen was overzealous. "This is not reflective of HOA policy." Translation: throw Karen under the bus to save the brand. Classic Linda. Karen's jaw dropped. "Overzealous? You were the one who told me to keep an eye out." Linda's smile was polished marble. "I said watch, not vandalize. There's a difference." The officers didn't need more. "Ma'am, please place the cutters on the ground." Karen tried one last Hail Mary. "You can't arrest me. I was defending property values. I was defending children." The taller officer sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from years of listening to bad excuses. "Turn around, ma'am." And just like that, Karen, the queen of Maplewood Estates, the self-proclaimed enforcer of suburban purity, was escorted down her front walk in handcuffs, bolt cutters abandoned on the lawn. The crowd didn't cheer, but they didn't look away either. It was the kind of spectacle people would replay in whispers for years. As the cruiser pulled away, Linda exhaled dramatically, turning to the neighbors. "Well," she said, "I suppose we can all agree this was unfortunate. Let's move on and focus on healing our community." But her eyes flicked to me, sharp and calculating, like she already sensed I wasn't done. She was right, because a week later, I delivered the final petty victory. At the next board gathering, neighbors arrived to find the clubhouse gate secured with a brand-new industrial lock gleaming under the porch light. When Linda asked for the key, I smiled politely. "Sorry, board members only. Karen's privileges have been revoked, and with her, anyone she handed a spare key to." The murmur that followed was delicious. A few chuckles, a few nods. Even Mrs. Patel whispered, "Well played." Karen wasn't there, of course. She was laying low, awaiting whatever fine or community service the court handed down. But her absence spoke louder than her shrillest accusations ever had. For the first time in months, Maplewood Estates felt quiet. Too quiet. Because deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't stay down forever. Women like her never did.